8th edition Warhammer 40,000 was meant to be a new era for the game, rebuilding the game from the ground up for a new, increasingly modernizing age of nerd culture. With a specific focus on being as pick-up-and-play as it possibly could be, early 8th edition was one of the best times to get into the hobby. And I'm glad that general era between late 7th and early 8th edition was where I got my start into the hobby. Starting with 8th edition, everything was different. The core rules were completely redesigned, which meant new rules had to be printed to let people play with their current models. In previous editions, when a new rulebook came out, all of the old codexes were still usable, but now that wasn't possible. So this led to the creation of the indexes, a series of books which just gave data sheets for the different armies to allow you to continue to use the models you already have, while GW wrote the codexes for each faction. It was in this paradigm that the Stratagem system was introduced to Warhammer 40,000 in 8th edition's core rulebook. Okay, so in 8th edition, you organized your units into detachments. Detachments gave you command points, and command points were then spent on stratagems throughout the game. Stratagems are typically situationally used abilities that give a unit some kind of advantage or bonus. Stratagems in this book, however, aren't really stratagems as we know them today. There's a command reroll, fight first, automatically pass a morale test. That's it. Those are the stratagems that every faction used out of the core rulebook in the indexes. Along with the simplicity of the rules for each army, this was one of the most beginner-friendly, pick-up-and-play versions of the game. But it didn't stop there. With the release of each codex, armies got a set of unique stratagems for them to use, and the upward trend was that newer codexes were far more reliant on stratagems than older ones. The first Space Marines codex, yes, there were multiple, we'll get to it, had stratagems like add +1 to the wound rolls of Sternguard bolt guns, fight before dying, fight twice. But then there's the Codex Orc stratagems like Grot Shields, a 1 CP stratagem that allows you to redirect wounds suffered by a character onto a nearby unit of Gretchen on a 2-up. The vast numbers you could take Grots in for basically nothing essentially made this stratagem a 2-up Feel No Pain for 1 CP. Or Ramming Speed, which let war bosses on bikes do D3 mortal wounds on a charge. You know, just putting impact hits from Conquest into 40k as a 2 CP stratagem. Oh, and it caused the war boss on Warbike to roll an extra d6 when charging. So on top of that, they were rolling 3d6 every time they charged, had a maximum charge range of 18, and had a vastly higher average charge range for 2 CP. What the fuck? How did this happen? Well, this was the result of a stratagem arms race. As newer codexes got released, the competitive community had realized just how powerful certain stratagem combinations could be. The Blood Angel Smash Captains of early 8th edition were fueled by a specific stratagem combination and some weirdness with how flying and charge rules worked in tandem with each other that allowed them to basically get guaranteed charges that did far more devastating damage than they had any right to. So for other armies to actually be relevant as they got their codexes, their stratagems were made powerful enough to match. This coalesced into the single most dominant strategy in all of 8th edition's history, which fully and completely ruined the game at all levels of play. Late 8th edition Iron Hand's Dreadnought armies. Yeah, so there were 2 Space Marine codexes in 8th edition? Well, no, okay, actually there were 14. But for the purposes of this video, we only really care about one of these books, the Iron Hands Codex Supplement. The Iron Hands Codex Supplement gave a new set of special rules for playing as, well, the Iron Hands, including a unique unit, Iron Father Pharos, a chapter doctrine and army-wide special rule that we'll get into soon, and 16 unique stratagems. These stratagems were some of the most powerful in the entire game, though the standout really was March of the Ancients. March of the Ancients was a 1 CP stratagem that allowed you to give a dreadnought the character keyword. This is a big deal because part of the character special rules means that characters that are below 10 wounds can't be targeted unless they are the closest model. Some dreadnought variants have less than 10 wounds, so you can just make a gun line of 4 or more untargetable character dreadnoughts, which were then screened by incredibly tanky intercessors thanks to the chapter special rule giving them a 6-up feel no pain. These untargetable character dreadnoughts were also incredibly powerful ranged combatants, with Iron Father Pharos being able to give one of those dreadnoughts a 2-up ballistic skill every turn. Methodical firepower, meaning they always had Devastator Doctrine active, which with Iron Hands also meant rerolling 1s, which also hit on 5s in Overwatch, just to add insult to injury. So within the span of a single edition, we've gone from you can spend 2 CP to automatically succeed on a morale test, to whatever the hell this is. This strange stacking of dozens of esoteric special rules and stratagems that allowed Iron Hands to become one of the most powerful armies in Warhammer 40k history, period, started as a set of 3 universally shared, fairly basic abilities. What the hell happened? This is one of the best and most clear-cut examples of power creep one could ever ask for. Stratagems are uniquely vulnerable to power creep as a mechanic. What do I mean by this? Well, for those who don't know, power creep is when a desire to make the new shiny thing you just added to your game worth taking by making it more powerful than the things previously added to the game. This is often subconscious and unintentional on the part of the game designer, as it becomes easier to make more reliably powerful additions to a system when you're very familiar with the way that system works. But oftentimes, it's pretty clearly intentional, like how in League of Legends, new characters are coincidentally game-breakingly overpowered, only to get nerfed into the ground as soon as skin sales for the character drops. The example of stratagems blurs this line a bit. It is well documented at this point that Games Workshop will often put a little bit of weight on the scales in favor of the new hotness, if unintentionally. As was uncovered during the Leagues of Votann controversy, GW playtests new codexes 2 or 3 codexes in advance. So the Leagues of Votann codex was playtested against the incredibly broken pre-nerf Craftworld Eldar and Tyranids codexes. So you can see then how something like Stratagems so swiftly spiraled out of control over the course of just one edition. New Codex 1 had more powerful stratagems, so new Codex 2 and 3 were also given more powerful stratagems to help them perform better in playtesting. So then 4 and 5 got even more powerful stratagems, until eventually you get Iron Father Pharos and his gun line of literal boomers. Everybody knew this was a problem. Every army at this point had gameplay and strategy defined by Magic the Gathering card effects rather than the actual units in the actual army. So, going into 9th edition, GW was in damage control mode. 9th edition saw a few critical changes that would drastically affect the power balance in regards to stratagems. A general underlying theme of a lot of the rules changes in 9th edition is trying to reduce the impact stratagems have on games. Now, instead of getting command points from detachments, you spent command points to get detachments. In the core rules, this was 12 CP for a 2,000 point game, so by the time you bought a battalion detachment, which now, thanks to the across-the-board price increases of models, was enough to fill out a 2,000 point list for most armies, you would probably have 7 to 9 CP going into a battle, depending on the amount of pre-game stratagems you used. This essentially killed stuff like March of the Ancient spam, or other similar lists that relied upon the constant rotation of a stratagem combo. So already, the impact of stratagems on games has been massively contained. You couldn't just take what were known as CP battery detachments, like the Loyal 32, since you spent CP to get detachments. So not only did this change the impact of stratagems on battles, it also reduced their impact on list building, since you had to limit your access to certain stratagems when picking detachments. However, GW wouldn't stop there. Over the course of 9th edition, GW would continually change the core rules of the game using seasonal rule set changes known as war zones. As of writing this video, but not as of recording this video, the current active warzone is Warzone Nephilim. The primary thing Warzone Nephilim changes is that now, regardless of the points maximum of your battle, you only have 6 CP to work with, and now it costs 1 CP to give your Warlord a Relic and a Warlord trait, each. So now, a battalion detachment with a Warlord in it costs 5 CP out of 6. So most of the time you're only going to have 1 CP going into a battle, and it will only get 1 extra CP more at the start of each battle round. So now we've gone from a game where armies regularly had 20 plus command points, and we're spending 5 to 7 command points a turn as a core part of their gameplay, to now where any stratagem worth more than 2 command points is a pretty big investment. And you typically only see 2 or 3 stratagems across an entire game. And then the rules for Arc of Omens got announced, so I had to rewrite this entire video! Yeah, okay, so Arc of Omens is changing the way detachments work. Now, instead of having Vanguard, Auxiliary, Patrol, Battalion, etc. detachments that cost command points, everything fits into a super modular, singular Arc of Omens detachment that costs 0 CP. Yes, you still have to pay for relics and warlord traits, but regardless, this system frees up a ton of CP for players to be able to use stratagems much more frequently than during Warzone Nephilim. The whole point I had written before was that I thought Warzone Nephilim signified GW slowly phasing out stratagems as a mechanic, but now it seems as though they plan on continuing to support the mechanic, which, if they do, I think they need to change the system massively. But how? Well, I think a good source of ideas for this would be 40k's humbler, but honestly much better sister system, Age of Sigmar. The design flaw at the core of stratagems is that they make armies needlessly more complicated to play. At the very back of the book is a giant list of stratagems that usually have conditional activations, can only be activated on or by certain units or in certain phases, and then there's obviously the fine print of the stratagem itself. All of this you have to remember and keep in mind at all times. Keeping track of the stratagems every unit you have has access to, and when they can activate them. Normally, you don't actually have to remember them all. There's usually only 4 or 5 per army that are actually good, but that is also a problem in itself. However, simply trying to limit the usage of stratagems as much as possible doesn't solve the problem either, because I do think stratagems provide an important amount of granularity and unit diversity in an otherwise very simple system that doesn't always allow for it. However, the same idea is executed far better and more efficiently in Age of Sigmar 3rd edition. So, Age of Sigmar doesn't really have stratagems, and command points are instead spent on a much more limited pool of command abilities, but their spiritual successor can be found in unit abilities. To use an example, Longbeards and Ironbreakers are very similar units in their stat line and battlefield role. Both are tanky frontline units that have effectively 3-up saves, 1 wound, 4-inch move, and 7 bravery. But they are very different in how they are used due to their abilities. Ironbreakers have a once per game ranged D3 mortal wounds dump on a nearby target, but Longbeards have Old Grumblers. Old Grumblers means that at the start of every command phase, you can pick one complaint the Longbeards have that turn. That complaint generates a 12-inch aura buff for all other dispossessed units. What this means is that Longbeards are better at holding up the front line, being in the area of the battle where the fighting is thickest and their buffs can impact the most amount of people, where Ironbreakers may be more at home on the flanks, where their lack of synergy with other nearby units makes them significantly more self-sufficient. Let them exert pressure on the flanks, while the Longbeards and the Hammerers and the Warden King hold the line. This essentially serves the same role as stratagems, giving units card game-like effects to make them feel more powerful and to add increased granularity and unit diversity under a core rule set that, due to its simplicity, can often lack both. But instead of every new army book coming with a mountain of new abilities for you to memorize and learn, oh hey look, they're just right there on the data sheet for the unit you're going to be regularly referencing during play anyway. Kind of seems like this solves all of our problems. Power creep isn't even as much of a concern because these are just abilities that are either passive or activated in a specific phase. They're not nearly as grossly impactful as stratagems were. Just seems like this is a much better system overall that GW could copy over into 40k to make it a much healthier game. On a unit's datasheet, have a section labeled stratagems, and then give each unit 1 or 2 stratagems they can use. You do that and bam, now you don't have to memorize the entire list of stratagems or constantly flip to the back of the book to reference pages upon pages of stratagems to see if there's one you want to use in that particular moment. It'd just be right there. On the datasheet you're already going to be referencing regularly during play. There's no reason for all this other guff. Overall, stratagems are a tragic end result of a well-intended gameplay mechanic that ended up, for a lot of people, ruining an entire edition, whose fate is still yet to be decided. Whether or not GW will radically change stratagems going forward into 10th edition, like I suggested, or simply try to keep the system's impact on the game in check till the heat death of the universe, is yet to be seen. But regardless, I think it's obvious that at this point, stratagems have represented a major issue in modern 40k for a very long time. Power creep, rules bloat, the slow alienation of a casual audience by making the game harder to learn by adding a bunch of stupid random bullshit you gotta memorize, all are present as a microcosm within stratagems. And that is Warhammer's stratagem problem. Thanks for watching. Hey, thanks for watching to the end of the video. Yeah, this video took a lot longer to make than I wanted it to. The patrons voted on this video back on November 2nd, so it was a bit of a ride, but I finally got it done. It's finally out, and if you want to vote on the next video that might come out within this century, you can go down to patreon.com/Mander and join all the other people who also give me money and also can vote on video topics, such as Angry Skeleton Pope, Why Am I Here, Gecko551, Zataku, Cassie Fox, Henry Michelle, Paul Camagliano, Randon Pearson, Jamie Harris, and Serena J. Fleming. Again, if you want to join them, go to patreon.com/Mander. If you want to contact me or keep up with the progress of videos through Twitter, you can go to and follow me at twitter.com/SallyMander40k. Those are the two primary ways you can support the channel a little bit harder than just liking and subscribing, though trust me, that's also greatly appreciated. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.